My husband left my mother's funeral with his mistress. At 3 a.m., a text from my dead mother exposed everything. My husband walked out of my mother's funeral with his mistress on his arm. Everyone saw it. His mother told me not to make a scene beside the coffin. That night at exactly 3:07 a.m., my phone lit up with a message from the woman I had just buried. Lydia, I'm alive. Don't trust the coffin. Come to the old greenhouse alone. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. For one long second, I thought grief had finally broken something inside my head. My mother was dead. I had seen the closed coffin. I had stood beside her portrait while people placed white lilies around it. I had listened to Reverend Thomas Cole pray over her soul with both hands folded and his eyes lowered. I had heard my own voice say, "Goodbye, Mom." Then my phone vibrated again. "Your husband helped them do this." The room tilted beneath me. I could hear the old clock in the hallway ticking, slow and sharp, like it was counting down the seconds before my life split open. Before that night, I thought I understood betrayal. I thought betrayal was a cold dinner table, a husband who stopped looking at you, a mother-in-law who smiled in public and cut you down in private, a phone placed face down whenever you entered the room. I was wrong. Betrayal was standing beside your mother's coffin, while the people who wanted her gone handed you tissues and told you to be strong. My name is Lydia Monroe. 6 years ago, I married Adrian Whitmore because I believed gentleness was the same thing as goodness. Adrian spoke softly. He remembered small dates. He opened doors, sent flowers, and called my mother Mrs. Monroe even after she told him to call her Margaret. He knew how I took my coffee. He knew I hated loud restaurants. He knew I had spent most of my life trying not to disappoint my mother, who had built Monroe Foods from one small bakery into a company that supplied half the hotels on the East Coast. I thought being known like that meant being loved. Now I understand something painful. Some people study you not to love you better but to learn where to press. My mother liked Adrian at first. She never trusted him fully. 1 week before my wedding, she brushed a speck of lint from my veil and looked at me in the mirror. Her face was calm, but her eyes were not. She said, "Baby, don't confuse a quiet man with a safe man." I laughed because I was nervous. I told her she had watched too many crime shows. She did not laugh back. She held my face between her hands and said, "When you marry, love him. Build with him. Give him your best. But keep one room in your heart locked for yourself." A woman who gives away every key may one day find herself standing outside her own life. At the time, I thought she was being dramatic. My mother had survived too much. She had buried my father when I was 11. She had fought banks, suppliers, lawsuits, and men who called her sweetheart while trying to steal her contracts. To me, she was strong because life had forced her to be. I was softer. I wanted a peaceful marriage. I wanted a home where love did not need armor. Adrian gave me that dream, at least at first. His mother, Vivian Whitmore, welcomed me with pearl earrings and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She called me darling in front of guests. She told everyone I had such a graceful way of speaking. She said my mother had raised a lovely daughter. At our rehearsal dinner, she lifted her glass and said, "Lydia will bring warmth into this family." Everyone clapped. I remember looking at Adrian, and he smiled as if I had just been given a prize. After the wedding, he asked me to move into the Whitmore house for a few months. "Mom gets lonely," he said. "The house is large. It will mean a lot to her. And it will save us money while we plan our own place." I agreed. That was my first mistake. The Whitmore house sat at the end of Hawthorne Lane, behind iron gates and old maple trees. It looked like a place where important families kept oil portraits, silver trays, and secrets. The first night I slept there, I awoke at 2 a.m. to the sound of pipes knocking behind the walls. I lay in the dark listening. Adrian slept beside me, still as stone. I told myself old houses made old sounds. But it was not the house warning me. It was my body. Within a month, Vivian stopped calling me darling. She called me Lydia. Then girl. Then nothing at all. She would stand in the kitchen doorway while I washed dishes and say, "In this family, we rinse crystal twice." If I made soup, she said it was thin. If I bought flowers, she said the color was vulgar. If I came home tired from work, she said women who complained about fatigue were women who lacked discipline. None of it was loud. That was what made it worse. If she had screamed, I could have defended myself. But Vivian wounded with a soft voice. She cut with manners. She could make an insult sound like a household rule. Adrian saw it. I know he did. But every time I looked at him for help, he looked away. At night, he stayed in his study with the door locked. His phone was always face down. When I asked if something was wrong, he kissed my forehead without warmth and said, "You think too much." That sentence became a cage. You think too much. You are too sensitive. You misunderstood her. Don't start drama. So I stopped asking. I learned to smile at breakfast, nod at dinner, and say, "Yes, ma'am." When Vivian corrected me in front of the housekeeper, I told myself I was choosing peace. But peace that costs you your voice is not peace. It is training. My mother noticed before I admitted it. One Sunday afternoon, I visited her office above the main Monroe Foods plant. It was the kind of office people expected from Margaret Monroe. Dark wood shelves. A long desk with clean stacks of paper. One wall covered in framed photos of the first bakery, the first truck, the first team of employees standing in aprons and flour-dusted shoes. She was signing purchase orders with a fountain pen she had used for 20 years. I sat across from her, twisting my wedding ring. She looked up and said, "What did they do now?" I smiled too quickly. "Nothing." She set the pen down. "Lydia." That was all. Just my name. And suddenly my throat burned. I told her Vivian was difficult. I told her Adrian was busy. I told her marriage required patience. My mother listened without interrupting. Then she opened the bottom drawer of her desk and took out a small gray envelope with a red wax seal. "If anything ever happens to me," she said, "you call Nora first." Nora Bell was my mother's executive assistant. She was quiet, sharp, and loyal in the way old locks are loyal. You never noticed them until someone tried to break in. I stared at the envelope. "Mom, why would something happen to you?" She looked toward the window, where the factory lights flickered against the dusk. "Because money makes honest people careful," she said. "And it makes greedy people brave." I wanted to ask more. But my phone rang. It was Adrian. He said his mother had invited guests and needed me home early. My mother watched me answer. Her face changed. Not anger. Not disappointment. Something worse. Fear. I did not understand it then. I wish I had. 3 weeks later, she was dead. At least that was what they told me. It was a Tuesday morning. Rain tapped against the kitchen windows while Vivian inspected a tray of breakfast pastries I had bought from my mother's bakery. She lifted one with 2 fingers and said, "Your mother's people overfill these. Americans think excess is flavor." Before I could answer, my phone rang. Nora's name flashed on the screen. When I picked up, I heard wind, traffic, and Nora breathing too fast. "Lydia," she said, "sit down." My knees weakened before she said the next words. "There's been an accident. Your mother's car went off the North Bridge." I do not remember dropping the cup. I only remember brown coffee spreading across the white tile like a stain that knew where it was going. Adrian came in from the hallway, tying his cuff links. "What happened?" "My mother," I said. "She's been in an accident." For 1 second, something moved across his face. Not grief. Not shock. Calculation. Then he stepped forward and put a hand on my shoulder. "We'll go when things are clearer," he said. I stared at him. "We'll go now." Vivian sighed behind me. "Hospitals are not improved by panic, Lydia." I grabbed my coat and left without answering. By the time I reached the private hospital outside Bellport, Nora was waiting in the hallway. Her hair was wet from rain. Her face looked 10 years older. "She's gone," Nora whispered. The words did not enter me at first. They hovered near my ear, refusing to become real. "No," I said. "I need to see her." Nora's mouth tightened. "They said the body was too damaged. Reverend Cole has already spoken with the funeral home. They recommend a closed coffin." I turned slowly. Reverend Cole. He had been my mother's church advisor for years. She donated to his community shelter. She paid for repairs to the chapel roof. She defended him when board members said he cared too much about wealthy donors. Nora lowered her voice. "He arrived before I did. That should have stopped me cold. It did not. Grief is fog. You can walk past a warning sign and call it a tree. The funeral happened 2 days later. Everything moved too fast. The hospital released papers. The funeral home sealed the coffin. Reverend Cole said my mother had once told him she wanted no delay if the day came. Vivian took over the guest list. Adrian handled calls I never heard him make. And I floated through it like a woman underwater. The church smelled of lilies and rain-soaked wool. My mother's portrait stood beside the coffin. She was smiling in the picture, wearing her navy blazer and the gold brooch shaped like a wheat stalk. People came and cried into my hands. Employees from Monroe Foods lined the back wall, silent and stunned. Some of them had worked for my mother since before I was born. One man from the loading dock, Mr. Alvarez, took off his cap and held it to his chest like he had lost family. "She gave my son his first job," he told me. "She saved us when my wife got sick." I wanted to answer. I could not. My mother was everywhere in that room, except where she should have been. Adrian stood beside me for 20 minutes. Then he checked his phone. Then he stepped away. By the time the final hymn began, he was gone. I told myself he had taken a business call. I told myself grief made people behave strangely. I told myself anything was better than the truth. Then one of the younger warehouse managers showed me a photo on her phone. She did not mean to hurt me. Her hand shook as she held it out. It was Adrian at the airport lounge. His arm was around Vanessa Hale, the woman who ran marketing for Whitmore Holdings. Her head rested on his shoulder. On the table between them were 2 champagne glasses. The timestamp was from that afternoon. During my mother's funeral, I walked outside because if I stayed, I would have collapsed beside the coffin. Vivian followed me into the church vestibule. Her black dress was perfect. Her pearls were perfect. Her voice was low enough that no one else could hear. "Do not embarrass this family," she said. I turned. "My mother is dead. And my son is under stress," she replied. "Not everything is about your grief." Something inside me went very still. For years, I had folded myself smaller to fit inside that family. I had mistaken endurance for virtue. I had called silence maturity. But beside my mother's coffin, with lilies wilting in the heat and my husband holding another woman in an airport lounge, I understood something. They had never wanted me small enough to love. They had wanted me small enough to use. Still, I did not scream. I did not slap Vivian. I did not run through the church and tell everyone what Adrian had done. I only looked at her and said, "Excuse me." She smiled as if she had one. That night, after the last guest left, I sat alone in my mother's house. Vivian had insisted I return to Hawthorne Lane. I refused. For once I refused. The house felt too quiet. My mother's reading glasses were still on the table beside her chair. A half-finished grocery list sat under a magnet on the refrigerator. Her cardigan hung on the back of the kitchen stool, one sleeve turned inside out. It was the ordinary things that broke me. Not the coffin. Not the flowers. The cardigan. The glasses. The grocery list. Proof that someone had expected to come home. At 3:07 a.m. my phone lit up. "Lydia, I'm alive. Don't trust the coffin. Come to the old greenhouse alone." I stared at the words until my hands began to shake. The old greenhouse sat behind Monroe Foods, where my mother used to grow herbs for the bakery when I was little. No one used it anymore. Half the glass panels were cracked. Ivy had swallowed one side. I should have called the police. Instead, I called Nora. She answered on the first ring. "I got a message," I whispered. "So did I," she said. 15 minutes later, Nora pulled up outside my mother's house with her headlights off. She handed me a black coat and a pair of flat shoes. "Leave your phone here," she said. I stared at her. "If this is real," Nora said, "they may be tracking it. If it's a trap, they expect you to bring it." I left the phone under a cushion on the sofa. Nora handed me an old prepaid phone. "Only call the number saved as bakery," she said. "That comes to me." We drove through service roads behind the factory. The sky was black, and the rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick under the moon. When we reached the greenhouse, Nora parked behind a delivery truck. The door was open. Inside, the air smelled of wet soil and rust. For a moment, I heard nothing but dripping water. Then a voice whispered my name. "Lydia." I turned. My mother was sitting on the floor behind an overturned potting table. Her face was bruised. One arm was wrapped in a dirty scarf. Her lips were cracked. But her eyes were alive. I fell to my knees. Mom! She pulled me close with her good arm. I had cried at the coffin. I had cried in the church. But the sound that came out of me then was not crying. It was my soul trying to return to my body. I'm here, she whispered. I'm here, baby. Nora locked the greenhouse door and moved toward us. Who did this? My mother closed her eyes. Adrian, she said. Vivian. Vanessa Hale. Grant Whitmore. And Reverend Cole. Grant Whitmore was Adrian's uncle and the family attorney. My stomach turned. They tried to kill me, my mother said. When the car hit the bridge rail, I was thrown clear before it went over. A fisherman found me in the reeds before dawn. I begged him not to report it. I knew if they learned I was alive, they would try again. Why? I asked, though part of me already knew. The merger, she said. Monroe Foods was about to block Whitmore Holdings from acquiring our supplier network. I found altered contracts, shell payments, a side agreement with Vanessa. Adrian married you to get close enough to our records. The greenhouse spun around me. No, I whispered. My mother touched my cheek. I'm sorry. That apology hurt more than the truth. I wanted to call 911. I wanted police cars, sirens, handcuffs. I wanted someone to drag Adrian from whatever hotel bed he was sharing with Vanessa and make him answer for every second I had spent beside that coffin. Nora stopped me. Not yet. I stared at her. Not yet? They tried to murder my mother. And right now, Nora said, we have a living victim who is supposed to be dead, one text message and your word. They have hospital papers, funeral papers, a sealed coffin, a reverend, and a lawyer. My mother nodded. Nora is right. I stood too fast. So we do nothing? No, my mother said. We do it right. That was the first lesson of the war I never asked to fight. Suspicion may save your life, but evidence saves the case. Nora cleaned my mother's wounds with bottled water and antiseptic from a first aid kit. My mother winced once and then clenched her jaw. She had 2 cracked ribs. Her shoulder might have been dislocated and reset badly. There was a cut near her hairline that had dried black. I wanted to take her to a hospital, but she shook her head. Not a hospital connected to them, she said. Nora had a plan. There was an old storage apartment above the unused packaging wing of Monroe Foods. Decades ago, the night supervisor had slept there during winter storms. Now it held broken chairs, extra uniforms, and file boxes no one had opened since 2008. It also had a bathroom, a cot, and a rear stairwell that did not show on the public building map. We helped my mother there before dawn. Every step made her breathe through her teeth. When she finally lay down on the cot, I sat beside her and held her hand. I thought I lost you, I said. You almost did. The words were plain. They cut through me. Nora placed the gray envelope in my lap, the same one my mother had shown me weeks before. Open it, my mother said. Inside were 3 things. A key card, a list of names, and a note in my mother's handwriting. If I am gone, trust Nora. Trust Detective Mara Sloan. Trust documents more than tears. I read it twice. Detective Sloan? My mother closed her eyes. She helped me years ago when a supplier tried to extort the company. She is honest. But we cannot bring her in until we have something clean enough for her to act on. I wanted to argue, but I heard Nora's words again. They had papers. They had a coffin. They had a reverend. They had a lawyer. We had truth. Truth alone was not enough. At sunrise, Nora drove me back to my mother's house. I washed my face with cold water until my skin hurt. Then I returned to Hawthorne Lane. Vivian was already in the breakfast room. She looked up from her tea. Where were you? Her voice was casual. Her eyes were not. I let my shoulders slump. At my mother's house. I couldn't sleep. She studied me. You look dreadful. I feel dreadful. She smiled slightly. Grief is not an excuse to neglect appearance. People watch widows and daughters. They judge the family by the way mourning is carried. My mother was alive in a storage room with cracked ribs, and this woman was lecturing me about mourning. I lowered my eyes. Yes, ma'am. There it was again. The phrase she loved. The phrase she thought proved I was weak. But that morning the words tasted different. They were no longer surrender. They were camouflage. There are people who see a woman lower her head and think she does not know pain. They hear her say yes and think she has no spine. But sometimes a quiet yes does not mean defeat. Sometimes it means I heard you. Sometimes it means keep talking. Sometimes it means one day I will remember every word. Adrian came home that afternoon. He wore a navy travel jacket and the tired expression of a man who expected sympathy for the inconvenience of his own betrayal. He hugged me in the foyer while Vivian watched. "I'm sorry I wasn't there," he said. His shirt smelled faintly of airport cologne and another woman's perfume. I let him hold me. That was the hardest thing I had ever done. "I needed you," I whispered. He pulled back and put both hands on my shoulders. "I know. I had a crisis with the London account." I looked at him. A woman can learn a lot from a liar who believes she still wants to be lied to. I nodded. "I understand." At dinner, Vivian served roast chicken and spoke as if my mother's funeral had been a family scheduling issue. "Your mother's lawyers will need to review the shares soon," she said. "Since you are in no state to manage business, Adrian can help." I lowered my eyes. "I don't understand those things." Adrian reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll protect you." For one wild second I almost laughed. Then I remembered my mother lying on a cot, breathing through cracked ribs. I swallowed the laugh and let tears fill my eyes instead. "Thank you," I said. Vivian looked satisfied. She thought grief had made me soft. She did not know grief had burned the softness off me and left something sharper underneath. That night, I left my bedroom door open a crack and sat on the floor in the dark. At 12:40 a.m., voices drifted from Vivian's study. Grant Whitmore spoke first. "The probate filing must happen before Margaret's board can demand independent verification." Vivian answered. "Lydia will sign whatever Adrian places in front of her." Then Adrian said, "What about the body?" Reverend Cole's voice came next, low and smooth. "The closed coffin and pastoral certification are enough for now. The hospital record identifies the remains. No one will request exhumation unless someone challenges the death certificate." Vanessa laughed softly. "Lydia challenge it? She can barely look up from the floor." I pressed my fist against my mouth. Grant spoke again. "We still need the voting proxy. Margaret kept too much control. Without Lydia's signature, the board can stall the acquisition." Adrian said, "She'll sign. She thinks I'm the only thing she has left." Every word landed like a stone. Not because it was surprising, because it was clear. I had spent years explaining his coldness to myself. Work stress, family pressure, a hard childhood, men who are bad at feelings. But sometimes the explanation is much simpler. He knew what he was doing. The next morning I called Nora from a gas station payphone 2 towns over. I had not used a payphone since college. "They're moving probate," I said. "Good," Nora replied. "Good. It means they'll leave fingerprints." Nora had already begun pulling threads. The hospital that signed my mother's death release was owned by a shell company linked to Grant. The funeral home had received a rush fee from an account Vanessa controlled. Reverend Cole had signed a pastoral identity confirmation, not a legal identification, but the funeral director had treated it like one because Grant attached a notarized family authorization. Each lie was small enough to hide behind paperwork. Together they formed a wall. But walls have seams. That afternoon, Nora brought a nurse to the storage apartment. The nurse was retired, discreet, and had once worked at a clinic my mother funded. She checked my mother's ribs, cleaned the wounds properly, and warned us that shock could still take her down if we pushed too hard. My mother listened, then asked for coffee. The nurse looked at me. "She needs rest, not coffee." My mother said, "I built a company on coffee and stubbornness. I'll take half a cup." For the first time in days I almost smiled. But when the nurse left, my mother's strength faded. She leaned back against the pillow and closed her eyes. "I should have protected you better," she said. I shook my head. "No. I should have listened." She opened her eyes. "Do not do that. Do not turn their crime into your shame." I looked away. I ignored so much. "You survived what you could not yet name." Those words stayed with me. That is what control does. It teaches you to doubt your own eyes before you doubt the person hurting you. By Thursday, we were ready to search my mother's office. I went to Monroe Foods wearing black and carrying a box of framed photos. I told the receptionist I wanted personal items from my mother's office. By then, everyone looked at me with pity, which helped. Pity is a curtain. People rarely look behind it. Nora met me upstairs. Inside my mother's office, everything smelled like her coffee and lemon hand cream. I nearly broke then. Not because she was dead. Because she was alive and hiding above a storage wing while the world mourned her. Nora closed the blinds. Then she moved to the painting of a wheat field behind my mother's desk. She pressed 2 points on the frame. The panel clicked open. My mother had always loved hiding things in plain sight. Inside was a thin black drive, 2 ledgers, and a second envelope. The first ledger tracked payments from Whitmore Holdings to 3 shell companies. The second tied those companies to Grant, Vanessa, and Reverend Cole's Charity Foundation. The drive held call recordings from my mother's smart car system. Nora plugged it into an offline laptop. One audio file was dated the night before the accident. Adrian's voice came through the speakers. Make sure she takes the bridge road. The north rail is already weakened. I sat down hard. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the laptop. Then Vanessa's voice answered. She always takes the bridge road after board dinners. Reverend Cole confirmed she has a meeting at 7. Grant will handle the paperwork if identification becomes difficult. Nora turned pale. But she did not stop. The next file was my mother's voice. It sounded like she had been driving. What are you doing in this lane? She said. Then a man's voice. Not Adrian. The hired driver. Ma'am, please stay seated. My mother said. You missed the turn. Then a sharp sound. A struggle. Crash. The recording ended. I covered my mouth. Nora put the drive into an evidence bag. We need chain of custody, she said. I'm calling Detective Sloan. Detective Mara Sloan arrived through the service entrance 40 minutes later. She did not bring sirens. She brought evidence bags. She was in her 50s with gray threaded through her dark hair and the tired eyes of someone who trusted facts more than faces. She listened to the recordings without interrupting. She reviewed the ledgers. Then she spoke with my mother in the storage apartment. My mother sat upright for the interview, refusing to lie down even though pain had drained the color from her face. Detective Sloan asked precise questions. Where did the car leave the road? Who was driving? When did she last see Adrian before the accident? Had she received threats? Who had access to her travel schedule? She did not promise immediate arrests. She did not give speeches. When I asked why they could not arrest everyone at once, she looked at me kindly but directly. Because I do not want them arrested for tonight, she said. I want them convicted later. That sentence changed how I thought about justice. Revenge is fast. Justice has to survive cross-examination. A text message could be called fake. A living victim could be called confused after trauma. A daughter could be called hysterical with grief. But a verified recording, a bank transfer, a false death document, a forged authorization, a witness, and a controlled confession could stand together. That was what we needed. Not a scene. A case. Detective Sloan said. We need them to act again, or confess to prior steps under controlled recording. I understood. The trap had to close from the inside. The next 2 days became the longest of my life. I returned to Hawthorne Lane and played the part they had written for me. Grieving daughter. Obedient wife. Foolish woman. Vivian gave me a black dress to wear to the reading of preliminary estate papers. It makes you look less washed out, she said. I thanked her. Adrian brought me tea at night and watched to see if I drank it. I pretended to sip, then poured it into the soil of a potted fern when he turned away. I did not know if it was drugged. I did not need to know. I was done trusting cups handed to me by liars. On Friday evening, Vivian invited Reverend Cole to dinner. He sat across from me, cutting roast beef with small careful motions. His voice was gentle. Your mother had a generous soul, he said. I looked at his hands. Those same hands had folded in prayer over an empty coffin. Did she suffer? I asked. His knife paused. Vivian looked up. Reverend Cole lowered his eyes. My dear, we should not dwell on such images. I just wondered, I said. Since you arrived so quickly. Grant, who had joined us for dinner, coughed once. Adrian placed a hand on my knee under the table. A warning. I let my face crumple. I'm sorry. I miss her. Vivian exhaled through her nose. Reverend Cole reached for my hand. I almost pulled away. Instead, I let him hold it. My child, he said. Faith asks us to accept what we cannot understand. No, I thought. Men like you ask that. Faith had nothing to do with it. Later that night, I found Adrian in his study. The door was partly open. He was on the phone with Vanessa. His voice was low. She's unstable but manageable. Mom thinks we should push the proxy Monday. A pause. Then he laughed softly. No, she won't suspect you. She still thinks you're just the woman from the airport photo. I stood in the hallway, barefoot and silent. The word just did something to me. Just the mistress. As if adultery had been the smallest part. As if my humiliation was a curtain for a larger crime. I moved away before he saw me. On Saturday morning, I went to my mother's house and retrieved her cardigan, the one that had hung on the kitchen stool. I brought it to the storage apartment. When she saw it, she pressed it to her face. For the first time since the greenhouse, she cried. Not loudly. My mother never cried loudly. Her shoulders shook once, twice, then stopped. I thought I would never smell home again, she said. I sat beside her. I'm going to end this. She looked at me. No. We are going to survive this. Ending it is Sloane's job. I nodded. That was another lesson. When people hurt us, we often want to become the weapon. But if we are not careful, we cut ourselves first. My job was not to punish them with my hands. My job was to stand long enough for the truth to arrive. By Sunday, Detective Sloane had enough to request quiet warrants for business records and digital preservation. She also had a plan. I would agree to sign the estate proxy at Hawthorne Lane on Monday evening. The document would be real enough to bring them into the room, but not valid once the investigation intervened. I would wear a small recording device. Detective Sloane and 2 officers would wait in the carriage house with Nora and my mother. My mother wanted to appear only after the strongest statements were captured. I hated that plan. I hated the thought of her standing in that house, injured and pale, in front of the people who tried to erase her. But she squeezed my hand and said, They buried me once. I will not let them speak over my grave twice. Monday came with clear skies. Felt wrong. I wanted thunder. I wanted the world to look as ugly as the thing we were about to do. Instead, sunlight fell across Hawthorne Lane as if nothing evil had ever happened there. Vivian spent the afternoon supervising the dining room. She ordered the housekeeper to polish the silver. She chose the blue china. She arranged white roses in the center of the table. White roses. For a meeting built on my mother's fake death. At 6 o'clock, Grant arrived with a leather folder. At 6:15, Vanessa came through the side entrance. She wore a cream suit and no shame. At 6:30, Reverend Cole entered with a Bible under his arm. At 6:45, Adrian came to my room. I was sitting at the vanity, looking at myself in the mirror. He stood behind me and placed his hands on my shoulders. You're doing the right thing, he said. I met his eyes in the glass. Am I? You need help. Your mother would have wanted you protected. My mother was 200 feet away in the carriage house with Detective Sloane. I lowered my gaze. I just don't want to be alone. His hands tightened. You won't be. I'm here. I almost asked him again if he had ever loved me, but I decided not to waste the question. Some answers are not spoken. They are lived. The meeting began at 7. I sat at the long dining table where Vivian had corrected my manners for years. The recorder lay hidden beneath the lining of my black dress. My pulse was so loud I wondered if it would drown out their voices. Grant opened the folder. These are temporary authorizations, he said. Given your emotional state, they allow Adrian to act on your behalf regarding estate matters, voting shares, and any challenge to corporate restructuring. I stared at the documents. Corporate restructuring? Vanessa smiled. It's just a business term. Nothing you need to worry about tonight. Vivian poured tea. Lydia dear, you have always been better suited to personal matters than corporate ones. There is no shame in knowing your limits. No shame. She always wrapped shame like a gift. Adrian placed a pen in front of me. Just sign here. Picked up the pen. Then I set it down. Before I sign, I want to understand something. The room changed. Not visibly, but I felt it, like animals hearing a branch snap. Grant smiled. Of course. I looked at Reverend Cole. How did you know my mother wanted a closed coffin? He blinked. She told me once. When? At church. My mother had not attended your church in 11 months. Vivian's cup clicked against its saucer. Grant leaned forward. Lydia, grief creates confusion. I turned to him. Then help me with mine. Why did your notary stamp appear on the family authorization 6 hours before Nora was told my mother died? The silence that followed was the first honest thing that family had ever given me. Adrian stood. Who have you been talking to? I looked at him then. Really looked. The man I had loved was gone. Or maybe he had never existed. Maybe love had dressed a stranger in my hopes and asked me to marry him. Did you ever love me? I asked. For a moment his face softened. Then Vivian snapped. Do not answer that. That was answer enough. I pushed the papers away. I know about the bridge rail. I know about the hospital record. I know about the rush fee. I know about the shell companies. Vanessa stood so fast her chair hit the floor. You stupid little. Grant grabbed her wrist. Sit down, Reverend Cole whispered. This is a misunderstanding. I looked at him. You prayed over a coffin you knew was wrong. His face went gray. Adrian moved toward me. Lydia, listen to me. Your mother was going to destroy everything my family built. She was going to expose fraud. He slammed his hand on the table. She was going to ruin us. Vivian stood now. Her voice lost its polish. Your mother was never satisfied. She looked down on us. She thought her little bakery empire made her better. She built her company honestly. Vivian laughed. Honestly? There is no honest wealth. There is only wealth held by people strong enough to keep it. The dining room doors opened. My mother walked in. She was pale. Her arm was in a sling. Detective Sloane stood beside her. For the first time since I had known Vivian Whitmore, her face lost all shape. Adrian whispered, Margaret. My mother looked at him as if he were a stain on glass. Yes, she said. Alive. No thanks to you. Vanessa backed into the sideboard. A glass fell and shattered. Reverend Cole crossed himself with a shaking hand. Grant looked not frightened but busy, as if his mind were already building a defense. Detective Sloane stepped forward. Adrian Whitmore, Vivian Whitmore, Grant Whitmore, Vanessa Hale and Reverend Thomas Cole. You are being detained pending investigation for conspiracy, attempted murder, fraud, obstruction, and evidence tampering. Reverend Cole began to cry. Grant demanded a lawyer. Vanessa screamed that none of it would hold. Vivian said nothing. She only looked at me. Not with guilt. With hatred. Adrian turned toward me as the officers moved in. Lydia, please, he said. You don't understand. My family was drowning. Your mother would have destroyed us. I stood slowly. No, I said. You destroyed yourselves. My mother only survived it. The arrest did not end everything that night. Real justice is slower than revenge. Detective Sloane explained the difference between being detained, charged, and convicted. Grant fought for bail before the first 48 hours were over. Reverend Cole tried to cooperate. Vanessa blamed Adrian. Vivian refused to speak. Adrian wrote me 3 letters from county jail. I returned all 3 unopened. Over the next month the evidence hardened. The smart car recording was verified. Bank transfers matched the ledgers. The hospital administrator admitted Grant had pressured him to process an emergency release. The funeral director testified that Reverend Cole and Grant pushed the closed coffin. Security footage showed Vanessa near the bridge 2 nights before the crash. A maintenance contractor confessed that he had been paid to weaken the guardrail under the cover of storm repairs. The fisherman who saved my mother gave a sworn statement. Nora documented every file she touched, every timestamp, every transfer, every copy. No one walked free because the story forgot the law. Some were held without bail. Some received conditional release before new charges brought them back in. Every step had a paper trail. Every lie met a document. Every document found a witness. At the preliminary hearing, my mother sat beside me. Her hand was warm in mine. Adrian looked smaller in the courtroom. His suit was wrinkled. His hair, once perfect, had fallen over his forehead. I expected to feel satisfaction. I did not. I felt tired. I felt older. I felt like a woman who had survived a fire and could still smell smoke in her hair. When the judge read the charges forward, Vivian finally looked back at me. "You were nothing before this family," she said. I leaned forward just enough for her to hear. "No," I said. "I was quiet before this family. There is a difference." The trial took 8 months. By then, the newspapers had turned my mother into a headline. The dead CEO who walked into her own murder plot. The Whitmore funeral fraud case. The Bridge Road conspiracy. I hated every headline. They made our lives sound like entertainment. They did not show my mother waking from nightmares, gasping because in her dreams she was still falling. They did not show me standing in grocery aisles, unable to choose cereal because Adrian used to like one brand and my body still remembered reaching for it. They did not show the way betrayal lingers in small habits. How you check locks twice. How you stop drinking tea someone else made. How kindness begins to look suspicious until you relearn its shape. On the 3rd day of trial, Reverend Cole testified. He had taken a plea agreement. His voice shook as he described the documents. He said Grant told him the death confirmation was a family matter. He said Vivian promised a large donation to his shelter. He said he never knew they intended murder. My mother listened without blinking. When the prosecutor asked why he signed a pastoral identity statement without seeing a body he could identify, Reverend Cole lowered his head. "I told myself I was helping a grieving family avoid pain," he said. The prosecutor let the silence sit. Then she asked, "And the money?" He did not answer. He did not need to. On the 5th day, Vanessa testified against Adrian. She said he planned everything. She said she only handled transfers because he told her they were part of a confidential acquisition strategy. Then the prosecutor played a recording of Vanessa saying, "Once Lydia signs, the Widow Act ends and we move fast." Vanessa went still. The courtroom heard every word. I looked down at my hands. My wedding ring was gone by then, but the pale mark remained. A circle of skin that had not yet caught up with the truth. On the 7th day, Adrian took the stand against his lawyer's advice. He looked at the jury more than he looked at me. He spoke about family pressure, about debt, about Vivian's expectations, about how Monroe Foods had blocked opportunities for years. He made himself sound like a desperate son trapped by powerful women. Then the prosecutor asked one question. "Mr. Whitmore, when Lydia Monroe stood beside what she believed was her mother's coffin, where were you?" Adrian swallowed. "At the airport." "With whom?" He closed his eyes. "Vanessa Hale." "Were you aware at that time that Margaret Monroe might still be alive?" His lawyer objected. The judge overruled. Adrian opened his eyes. "I thought it was handled." The words left his mouth before he understood what they meant. Handled. Not mourned. Not tragic. Handled. A sound moved through the courtroom. My mother's hand found mine. For the first time, I felt something like release. Not joy. Never joy. But release. Before the verdict came, there was one more thing I had to do. Detective Sloan called it a victim impact preparation meeting. My mother called it standing in the ashes without pretending they were snow. The prosecutor wanted us ready for sentencing. She said the court might ask us to describe what the crime had done to our lives. Not just the broken ribs. Not just the fraud. Not just the money and documents and false certificates. The life damage. I sat in a small conference room with beige walls and a table that smelled faintly of old coffee. My mother sat beside me. Nora sat on the other side. Her hands folded around a paper cup she never drank from. The prosecutor asked, "Lydia, what do you want the judge to understand?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. How could I explain it? How could I explain that I had started doubting every gentleman who held a door open for me? How could I explain that every time a phone lit up after midnight, my heart ran back to 3:07 a.m.? How could I explain that the worst part was not only that Adrian betrayed me, but that he taught me to participate in my own silencing? I looked down at my hands. "I want the judge to understand that they did not only try to kill my mother," I said. They tried to make me mourn her while they stole from her. They wanted my grief to become their hiding place. The prosecutor stopped writing. My mother reached for my hand under the table. I kept going. They made me stand beside a coffin and accept a lie. They made employees say goodbye to a woman who was still bleeding somewhere. They made a church into a stage. They made marriage into a weapon. And then they called me unstable when I started asking questions. My voice shook, but it did not break. That mattered to me. For a long time I had measured strength by how little pain I showed. My mother had once lived that way too. But that day I understood another kind of strength. The kind that tells the truth while trembling. Nora spoke after me. She did not cry. Nora almost never cried. She described the first night in the greenhouse, the smell of wet soil, the way my mother's pulse fluttered under her fingers, the fear that one wrong call would bring the killers back before help could arrive. Then she spoke about paperwork. That was Nora's language. She told the prosecutor that fraud is often treated as clean because it happens on letterhead. But this fraud had blood under it. Every forged signature had pushed a living woman closer to a legal grave. Every rushed form had made it harder for the truth to breathe. My mother listened, then asked for a minute. When it was her turn, she said, "I want them punished, but not because I hate them." I looked at her. She continued, "Hate is too small for what they did. I want them punished because a society that lets powerful liars turn paperwork into a coffin teaches every other liar to try." The room went quiet. The prosecutor nodded once. "We will include that," she said. After the meeting, my mother and I sat in the car for a while before driving home. Rain dotted the windshield. She did not start the engine. Finally, she said, "You asked me once why I never remarried after your father died." I remembered. I had been 14, angry, and embarrassed that other girls had stepfathers who came to school events while my mother came in a suit, still answering calls from the bakery. "You said you were too busy," I said. She smiled faintly. I was. But that was not the whole truth. She watched the rain slide down the glass. "Your father loved me well. Not perfectly. No one loves perfectly. But safely. After he died, many men were kind to me. Some were charming. Some were rich. Some were lonely. But I never again met a man whose love made me feel more like myself, not less. So I chose not to trade peace for company." I swallowed. I wish I had known the difference. She turned to me. "You know it now." For months, I had felt ashamed of the years I spent trying to win Adrian back from a distance he had created on purpose. But my mother's words loosened something. Knowing late is still knowing. Leaving late is still leaving. Surviving late is still surviving. That night, I went back to the apartment I had rented after leaving Hawthorne Lane. It was small, above a florist, with windows that rattled when trucks passed. The first week there I hated it. It felt too plain after all those years in the Whitmore house. Then one morning I realized no one in that apartment corrected the way I made coffee. No one told me how to fold towels. No one asked where I had been with a smile that meant accusation. The silence there belonged to me. I began filling the room slowly. A blue chair. A lamp with a crooked shade. Books my mother had given me. A cheap kettle that whistled too loudly. I bought yellow curtains because Vivian would have called them common. Every small choice felt like reclaiming land. One evening, Mr. Alvarez from the loading dock came by Monroe Foods with his wife and a basket of tamales. He said they were for my mother, but he handed them to me. "Your mom saved our family once," he said. "You saved her back." I started to say I had not done enough. He shook his head. "Do not insult what you survived." That sentence joined my mother's in the quiet room of things I would keep. Do not insult what you survived. The next week, I found a box of my old wedding things in storage. Vivian had sent it through a courier with no note. Of course she had. Even from a cell or through her attorneys, she knew how to turn objects into messages. Inside were place cards, dried flowers, a guest book, and the framed photo Adrian and I had taken under the oak tree at the reception. In the picture, he was looking at me with such convincing tenderness that I almost hated the photograph more than I hated him. For a while I stood over the box and felt stupid again. How could I not have known? How could that smile have fooled me? Then I remembered something Detective Sloan had said after one of the hearings. People think fraud works because victims are foolish. That is not true. Fraud works because liars work hard. Adrian had worked hard. Vivian had worked hard. Grant had worked hard. They had staged kindness, grief, faith, law, and family. I had not been foolish for believing in the things decent people are supposed to be able to believe in. So I took the wedding photo out of the frame. I did not burn it. Burning felt too dramatic, too much like giving him one final ceremony. I cut myself out carefully with a pair of scissors. Then I put my half in a drawer, not because I wanted to remember the marriage, but because I wanted to remember that the woman in the white dress had not been weak. She had been hopeful. There is a difference. The sentencing hearing came after the verdict, but before that rainy Thursday, there were days when I doubted whether any verdict could repair the damage. That is something stories often skip. They show the arrest, the trial, the guilty faces, and then they call it closure. But closure is not a door someone else shuts for you. Sometimes it is a door you build piece by piece, out of sleep, food, therapy, honest friends, and mornings when you choose not to reread old messages. I started seeing a counselor named Dr. Elaine Porter. At our first session, I told her I did not know what to talk about. She said, "Then tell me what you are afraid I will think." I laughed once bitterly. That I was stupid. She nodded as if she had expected that. "Were you?" I looked at the floor. I stayed. That is an action, not an identity. I looked up. She said, "People stay for many reasons. Hope, fear, money, family, religion, isolation, exhaustion, love, shame, a promise they made before they had all the facts. Staying does not make you stupid. It means we need to understand what staying cost you and what leaving required." I cried then. Not pretty tears. Not the controlled tears I had learned to shed in bathrooms at Hawthorne Lane. I cried until my chest hurt. Dr. Porter handed me tissues and did not tell me to calm down. No one had done that for a long time. The week before the verdict, I visited Hawthorne Lane one last time with a court officer and my divorce lawyer to collect personal belongings. The house was colder than I remembered. Without Vivian's commands, without Adrian's footsteps, without the constant pressure to behave, it seemed less like a mansion and more like a museum of bad air. In the kitchen, the potted fern was dead. The one I had used to dump Adrian's tea. I stood before it for a moment. My lawyer asked if I was all right. Yes, I said. And I was. Not happy. Not healed. But all right. In the bedroom, I found one of Adrian's cuff links under the dresser. Silver square. Engraved with his initials. I remembered kneeling on the floor years earlier, searching for one just like it before a charity gala, because Adrian had been angry that I misplaced it. I had apologized for 20 minutes. Now I held the cuff link in my palm and saw it clearly. A tiny piece of metal. Not worth my fear. Not worth my tears. Not worth the years I spent shrinking around his moods. I placed it on the dresser and left it there. Some things do not need to be taken back. Some things need to be abandoned where they belong. The verdict came on a rainy Thursday. Adrian was found guilty of conspiracy, fraud, obstruction, and attempted murder. Grant was found guilty of fraud, forgery, obstruction, and conspiracy. Vanessa was found guilty on the financial charges and conspiracy. Reverend Cole was sentenced under his plea, stripped of his position, and ordered to repay funds. Vivian was found guilty of conspiracy and obstruction. When she heard it, she lifted her chin. Even then she refused to bow. But I noticed her hands. They shook. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. How did it feel to see justice? Did I forgive my husband? What would happen to Monroe Foods? My mother paused at the top of the steps. She looked thinner than before the accident. Her hair had more gray. But her eyes were steady. She said, "Justice is not a feeling. It is a responsibility." Then she walked past them. Months later, Monroe Foods reopened under my mother's leadership. Nora became chief operations officer. The old greenhouse was repaired. My mother planted basil there again, though her hands shook sometimes when thunder rolled over the roof. The first time she walked across the North Bridge after repairs were finished, I went with her. We did not speak. At the center, she stopped and looked down at the river. The water moved quietly below. "I remember the cold," she said. I took her hand. "I remember the coffin." She nodded. We stood there until the wind changed. As for me, I filed for divorce on a bright morning in May. I wore a blue dress, not black. I signed my name without crying. The lawyer asked if I wanted to keep the Whitmore name until the proceedings ended. No, I said. I had carried that name like a bruise long enough. People ask if I regret not seeing the signs sooner. I used to say yes. Now I tell the truth. I saw many signs. I simply did not know I was allowed to believe them. That is what control does. It teaches you to doubt your own eyes before you doubt the person hurting you. It turns your instincts into questions. It turns your anger into guilt. It turns your patience into a leash. But the day I saw my mother walk into that dining room alive, bruised and unbroken, something in me returned. Not the old Lydia. She was gone. Maybe she needed to be. The woman who remained knew how to love without surrendering her keys. She knew how to grieve without collapsing. She knew how to wait, watch, record, and speak when the truth could no longer be buried. Sometimes I still dream of the funeral. In the dream, I am standing beside the coffin again. The lilies are too white. The church is too quiet. Adrian walks toward the door. Vivian tells me not to make a scene. But this time the coffin opens. My mother sits up, looks straight at me and says, "You can leave now." And I do. I walk out of the church. I walk past the flowers. I walk past the people whispering. I walk into the morning with my own name in my mouth. So if you are listening to this and you have been told you are too sensitive, too dramatic, too weak, remember this. A quiet woman is not always a defeated woman. Sometimes she is gathering proof. Sometimes she is protecting the last safe room in her heart. Sometimes she is waiting until the lie grows heavy enough to fall by itself. And sometimes at 3:07 in the morning the truth sends one message. And the whole house of lies begins to collapse.